The day that we launched, we sold out of every bottle.
How do you distinguish yourself from other beauty brands?
The niche that I was able to tap into was relatability and authenticity.
In 2023, you were acquired by Procter Gamble. You were unfortunately called a sellout. Were you surprised by the response to getting acquired?
I like to look at it as you sell up.
You mentioned a personal strategy in a pain that you really managed to turn into purpose. Talk to us about that. Hello, I'm Ruth Umoh, Leadership Editor and host of Fortune Executive Exchange. I'm joined today by Mielle CEO Monique Rodriguez to discuss the tragedy that sparked her entrepreneurial journey, the haircare-wise acquisition by a Fortune 50 company, and her reaction to criticism over selling a Black-owned brand to a non-Black parent company. Before we dive in, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below to share your thoughts on this conversation. Monique Rodriguez, thank you so much for joining Fortune Executive Exchange. We're delighted to have you. You are the mastermind behind Mielle hair care products. Talk to us about your founding story. Walk us through that. What was the catalyst behind launching this line?
Yeah, well, thank you. That's a huge compliment. So I started the brand in 2014, and I've always loved the hair care space. I've always been very passionate about the beauty industry. When I was younger, I would ask my mom to take me to different model calls so I can model for other hair care companies. But she quickly told me this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I went to all of these model calls. No one ever selected me to be on the face or the cover of any hair care brand. In hindsight, now I know why. So my mom, she encouraged me to go the nursing route. She always encouraged me to go to school, and I became a nurse at the young age of 22. I started as a labor and delivery nurse, but I quickly knew that this was not something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life, but I did it for 8.5 years. And unfortunately, it took for me to go through a very tragic loss with the loss of my son in 2013 when I was 8 months pregnant. But I chose to channel that pain into purpose, and I looked at social media as a creative outlet for me to express myself and to go back to that thing that was always there, that passion that was always there, and that was hair care. So I started on Instagram posting tutorials and talking about different ways that I styled my hair. And what I saw was that there were so many women that were also suffering the same challenges. And so I saw a void in the industry of a lack of relatability. As a consumer myself, there were a slew of products on the shelf, but I felt that as a consumer, these brands were just talking at me and not having conversations to really understand my hair struggles. And so I said that with my science background, being a nurse, I was already educating women on, their bodies and the health of their bodies. So I can take that same science and educational approach and help women and educate them on how to navigate their hair journey. And so a couple of months later, I went in the lab with, local chemists that I found online, and we started to create together what I was making at home. The concoctions, I wanted to actually bring it to fruition. And so I started with one product, which is our mint almond oil. We launched, and the rest is history.
It took off from there.
Yeah.
We'll soon delve into your entrepreneurial journey specifically, but you mentioned a personal strategy in a pain that you really managed to turn into purpose. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so of course, when you go through traumatic life experiences, it was very high risk for my life as well. And I realized that once I came out of that, number one, the only thing that got me through that was my faith in God, because I couldn't turn to my family. I had 2 girls that, I still had to be strong for. My husband couldn't get me through that. My mom couldn't get me through that. Nothing could get me through other than leaning on God and knowing that, I went through this pain because there was something bigger and there was a bigger purpose. And I feel that, I've always had the entrepreneurial bug, but I was too afraid to step out on faith to do that. And I realized that for all of these years that I was working as a nurse, I was living my mom's dream. I wasn't living for my dream. And I felt that God always had something in me, because even when I worked as a nurse, my mom would tell me, find a good job, because I would bounce all around from hospital to hospital because I was always looking for happiness. And she would tell me you need to sit still because you're not going to have a pension. And I was 20 something years old. I'm I'm not worried about a pension. I want to find somewhere that I'm happy. But it wasn't that, I was looking for happiness. The happiness was not in my nursing career. The happiness was going to be fulfillment, and fulfillment comes from actually walking in your purpose. And I felt that, working as a nurse, it wasn't something that was fulfilling for me. And when I went through the loss with my son, I realized that I had to live life that was meaningful and purposeful, because you only get one shot at life.
So you go through the unfortunate loss of your son, and then from there, I'm assuming you took a break from working as a registered nurse and RN.
No, I had to go right back to work.
You went right back to work.
Yes.
And so you were doing that full time, and then Mielle was the side hustle, or how did you balance the two?
Yeah, so Mielle was actually like a side hustle or a side hobby, because yes, I went back to work shortly after I gave birth, and going back to work at a place where, you're not really invested in, and, postpartum depression is very real. And I had to deal with that, and also going through a loss. So I was dealing with a lot of different emotions at that time. And I knew that as a nurse, I'm dealing with patients, I'm dealing with life and death. And at that time I was working as a home health nurse. So it was just me and the patient. And when you're working as a home health nurse, you have to be fully invested. You have to be fully coherent. You have to know exactly what you're doing. And I started to realize that my mind was not there as I would go into patients' home. I was always a very friendly, bubbly nurse, had great personality with my patients. And I have a great sense of self-awareness. And I realized that I was not giving them the best of me. And, as I was taking my mind off of what I was going through with my son, I was at home, using Mielle. It wasn't Mielle at that time, but using that as a creative outlet. But my mind, every time I would go to work, my mind was on that. And so I had to make the conscious choice to leave my nursing career, 6 months after I started Mielle, even though we wasn't making any money. It was a risk that I knew I had to take because I didn't want to risk anyone's life working as a nurse.
How did you make that calculated risk? I mean, I'm certain that there were certain metrics you were looking out for. That's my first question. And then secondly, you mentioned the fact that you really leverage social media as a platform to engage consumers and audience, and also to build your personal brand. And so I'm curious how you were able to kind of foster that growth through social media.
Yeah, I would say it was a calculated risk, number one, because from the day that we launched, May 23rd, we started with one product. And from May 23rd, 2014, up until today, we have never not had a sale. Every single day from the day that we launched, we saw growth. And it was growing day after day, month over month, year over year, right? And so seeing that trajectory, gave me the foresight to know that I was onto something, right? I was onto something special. And I knew that if I dedicated 100% of my time, that I could really focus on making this grow and scaling it to the level of where I knew it could possibly be. And then my husband also worked. So, I didn't just leave cold turkey, and we didn't have income coming in to support our family. Granted, we were used to 2 incomes, so we had to dial down to only having 1 income, but we still had money coming in to support our household while I can still focus on my side, hobby at the time. And then, when I started, I only had 500 followers. So, I just really focused on how can I grow my community? And so starting with 500 followers to now having over 1 million followers and being the largest, in the textured hair care space with our community has been so rewarding, but literally started from humble beginnings, grassroots. And I really focused on building that trust with my community, because I always felt that people want to do business with who they know, like, and trust, because I wanted that as a consumer. And so I really focused on how do I make people feel like they're comfortable and they know me and I'm an authority in this space. And I really just focused on building that before pushing out a product.
Was there a crucible moment where you said to yourself, whoa, we're getting a ton of sales, where you really see the growth accelerated, and you said to yourself, I might really be onto something here? Any one moment that you can pinpoint?
Yeah, actually, I'll give you 2.
Sure.
So it was the day that we launched, when we had about maybe 100 bottles worth of inventory. And given that, I was not known. I just came out of nowhere, as people say. I had 500 followers. I'm well, people don't know me yet, so it's going to be a slow process. So these 100 bottles should carry us for 6 months or so. The day that we launched, we sold out of every bottle. And that was the aha, okay, I think I'm really onto something. And then my husband came on board because he had to help pack and ship. He has a background in logistics. So he quickly hopped on and utilized his logistic background and just jumped right in to help get these packages out. And then we were scratching our heads saying, okay, now where do we get more inventory? Because funding was a issue. We had to
Were you
bootstrap.
self-funded initially?
We were also funded, using our paychecks to fund the business. And so we had to figure that part out of getting new inventory and then having our customers wait for long shipping time frames. But the great thing about that was our customers, they waited and they trusted us. So they were willing to go along the ride with us. And so that was like my first aha moment was the day that we launched in Sally Beauty, which was in 2016, a year and a half after starting the brand, which has never happened for, especially a Black female entrepreneur, to enter into the retail space after a year and a half. And they tested us, they put us in 95 stores and they said, we're gonna test you guys out to see how you do. And they were not expecting the response. The day that we launched, and I'll never forget the day, it was February 19th, 2016. We sold out in less than 2 hours in every single 95 store. And we had customers that were going to all of Sally's stores, not the 95 stores, but they were literally harassing the store managers saying, well, she said that she was gonna be in Sally's. We went to our Instagram page and the products are not here. And that got all the way up to the Sally CEO where they gave us a call and they're like, whatever you guys are doing on social media, please stop it because it's causing chaos in our corporate, building. And that was like, okay.
I'm sure the Sally workers are
yeah.
not too happy.
That was my second moment. Like, yeah, we're really on to something.
Here. Absolutely. Well, let's talk about investing because you said you were self-funded initially. At what point did you reach out to outside investors and what was that process like for you raising capital?
Yeah, so raising capital was a huge challenge because, we were self-funded and we basically bootstrapped for up until 2021 is when we took our first, 2020, when we took our first investment from New Voices. And before then, we were operating with a line of credit. When we got into retail, we had a small, my husband likes to say it was a hard money loan to help us get into retail. And that was a very small loan, but actual real investment money wasn't until 2020. And we had went through a very hard period in 2018 where, our cost of goods were very expensive. We had the wrong people on our team that were not monitoring our books correctly. And so we were in a state where we did not have any profit. So we were just running the company. And then we look up and we're like, oh, we're in the hole, a lot of money here. And so now we have to figure out how to climb ourselves up out of this hole. So at that time, we were trying to raise money when we really needed the money. And we heard so many no's. People just kept closing their doors left and right. And it was a huge challenge for us. And we really didn't know, if Mielle would make it, will we have to close our doors? Because on the outside, the company was growing tremendously. If you looked at us from the outside looking in, you'd be like, oh, that company is doing great. But on the back end, when you lift up the hood and you're like, oh, no, this is not looking good, and no one would believe in us. And it wasn't until we had a conversation with Richard Lou Dennis, who was a former CEO of Sundial Brands. And, when we told him our problems and what we were going through, he pretty much laughed at us and he was willing to believe in us and help us out. But that was after getting a lot of no's. And he initially made an investment in us to help, turn our company around and get us in a profitable state. And then after that investment, we saw 4x growth. And that's when we started attracting the eyes of private equity firms that wanting to invest in us. We went from wanting people to invest in us to now people are chomping at the bits, wanting to be a part of Mielle. So, it was a challenge, but I always tell entrepreneurs, if you have to, take on investment, make sure that, you understand the partnership, understand do you and the investors share the same vision, share the same goals? And if you don't have to dilute your shares early on, don't do that. And the best advice that I received was to always raise money when you don't need it. And I appreciate that advice now because I know what it's like to raise money when you need it and how it was a struggle, and then to be on the other side and to raise it when you don't need it and how everyone wanted a piece of the pie.
I'm going to circle back to discuss investments, and certainly Rachel, who I know quite well. As you look at your hair care line, how do you distinguish yourself from other beauty brands that are also targeting textured hair? As we know, the natural hair care movement has seen this rapid rise over the last 5 to 10 years. So how do you find that niche and distinguish yourself as a brand?
Yeah, well, the niche that I was able to tap into, I felt was relatability and authenticity. And number one, having high performing products. I feel that the way that our products perform, the quality of the ingredients that we use, our products are made truly with love. The products are used on my hair. They're tested on my hair before they even go out into the market. So it's just the level of transparency that we've always been able to invite our consumers in on this journey with us. We call them our mavens, and they've always felt like they've been a part of the journey from the very beginning. So that was a white space opportunity that I saw, and I felt that's what helped separate us from everyone else in the competitive landscape and caused us to be a disruptor in this industry.
Going back to the conversation on funding, you managed to receive a $100 million investment, if I'm not mistaken, from the private equity firm Berkshire Partners. You've previously said you were hesitant to share that news. Why is that?
Well, I think that, our partners at Berkshire, we were all kind of hesitant because, a lot comes with that territory when you announce the magnitude of what the investment is. But for us, we decided to, share it because, again, less than 1% of Black women have raised over $1 million. And I felt that we have to share this historic moment because my goal is to literally change the narrative and to change the trajectory. So when the next Monique Rodriguez sits down at the table, she'll have an opportunity, an even better opportunity to raise more than 9 figures and to still maintain majority ownership, because that was the key. With myself being the first African-American to raise that much and to still maintain majority ownership, it was huge. And I really wanted to show that example of the young girls looking at me. I want to be that person that I needed growing up. Kids can't be what they don't see. And I want to show my community that it's possible, that we can change that statistic if we really just dial in and focus and follow our dreams, follow our passions, surround ourselves with the right people and the right mentors. Because, you have to raise your hand and ask for help. It's one thing to be the CEO of the company, but I'm the first one to say, I don't know everything, but I know how to raise my hand and ask for help. And the reason why I've been able to achieve and accomplish a lot of the things that I have been able to is because I raised my hand and I asked for help.
You say there's a burden that sometimes comes with making such an announcement, which sounds surprising as an outsider. What do you mean by that?
So I think the community is not normalized to see Black success, right? So there's an opportunity to educate our community on what the normal trajectory of business is. I feel that the opportunity is to help our community understand that you need help to grow and scale, because as a Black founder, I don't have the same resources. I don't have the same access to capital, right? I don't have the same access to scale my brand unless I take on investments to help me really fully realize my full potential and the dream of making Mielle a global beauty brand. And with us not having that same type of access and resources, I think it's important to show the community that we have to start somewhere. And for us to have more access, to have more resources, we need more entrepreneurs to build their brands, to scale it, to take on investments, to have successful exits, so we can then take that and pour that back into our community. And not only pour the capital back into the community, but also the knowledge, the expertise, and the resources. We can't do that if we don't set the example.
That's a perfect segue into my next question. In 2023, you were acquired by Procter Gamble, which is no easy feat. It's a Fortune 50 company. You also are among a number of Black-owned beauty brands that have become acquired, Shea Moisture, Carol's Daughter, and the like. And when that happens, especially when it's sold to a white-owned parent company, there's a lot of backlash that often comes with it. You were unfortunately called a sellout. Were you surprised by the response to getting acquired by P&G, and what was your response in the moment?
Yeah, I like to look at it as you sell up because it's an opportunity to help scale your company up. And my whole goal from the very beginning with Mielle is to be a global beauty brand. And, partnering with P&G has allowed my dreams to literally come true, because the whole goal was to create more accessibility for our consumers so they can go into the stores and the shelves and see Mielle products. A huge complaint when we first started the company, and as I mentioned, even with Sally Beauty, we can't find the products on the shelf. Our community should have access to high quality, great products, performing products wherever they go, right? If they go to somewhere in Idaho, like they should be able to find Mielle products. And my goal is to make sure that they have that type of access. Partnering with Procter Gamble, I've been running this company for 9.5 years before partnering with Procter Gamble. And it was a lot of work, right? And I want to be able to have the infrastructure and the support, to help build more brand awareness, to help have access to Black scientists and chemists, to help further our innovation, and to help also build up our community. So as a result of this partnership, we were able to establish Mielle Cares. Mielle Cares focuses on how do we advance Black and Brown community with helping young tweens and teens have a positive, resilient mindset and furthering their journey of education and entrepreneurship. That wouldn't have been able to happen if we didn't step up and donate $10 million to Mielle Cares. And P&G also showed their commitment to the advancement of Black and Brown communities by matching with an additional $10 million. That was created from this partnership. Being the first texture brand to partner with the WNBA, we have done brand ambassadorships with Asia Wilson and Juju Watkins. So just to see where the brand is going, and we have so many more partnerships. We're doing a lot with HBCUs. We partner with FAMU, the cheerleading squad. We partner with Howard, the swim and diving team. And that's just only the beginning. So because of this partnership, we've been able to really pour into the community that we continue to serve, that's been supporting us from the very foundation of Mielle.
Give us an inside look into how this partnership with P&G came to be, because like I said earlier, it is a notable feat. It's one that many entrepreneurs won't be able to access. Who came to who? How did the conversation develop? What does it look like from the insider perspective?
Yeah, so it was literally a dating process, because again, when you partner with someone, the most important thing is, do you guys have the same vision? Do you guys have the same goals? And I look at a partnership as a marriage, right? You want to date that person, before you actually tie the knot. And we had the opportunity to date P&G. We had the opportunity to go see their headquarters and meet the people that, made the company go around. And I was so impressed to see the diversity, with the team, the diversity that even worked on, our account to make this deal happen. That was very impressive to me, because I'll tell you, quite frankly, when we were talking with a lot of people, we didn't see that level of diversity. And to see that there were a company that had people that were employees for 30 plus years, they had longevity, and their whole motto or their mission is force for growth, force for good. And it's aligned with our mission at Mielle to always empower, excite, and continue to educate our community. And they came to the table to say, how can we help you advance your community? That's literally what sealed the deal for us.
You haven't publicly shared how much you were acquired for, but what financial metrics, what growth metrics can you share to put Mielle's success into context?
Yeah, well, we are the fastest leading growing Black founded, Black female brand in this industry. And even since we've partnered with P&G, we've experienced upwards of 50% growth since the partnership. So we're continuing to lead the space in this texture hair care industry, and we're continuing to take it by storm.
You stayed on as CEO of Mielle. Why not grab the cash and start something new? Become a serial entrepreneur, if you will.
Yeah, so that's a great question. But for me and my husband, it's never been about the money. It's always been about purpose and our mission. And our mission is to continue to serve. We've always been very in tune with the culture and how do we continue to push the culture forward. And quite frankly, I love what I'm doing. Like I mentioned earlier, it was for me finding what was fulfilling for me. And every day that I get up, it doesn't feel like work. Every day I go to the office, or I'm doing Zoom calls, or I'm meeting with my team talking about product ideas or marketing or anything PR related. It's fun to me. So, I'm having fun, and, continuing to drive the vision forward was the reason why I wanted to stay on, because it's about legacy. It's not about the money, but it's how can I continue to create legacy and continue to serve the community above and beyond.
So what does that legacy look like for you as you look to the future?
So the legacy looks like, Mielle will be around for hundreds of years from now. And, I envision my great-great-grandkids going into the stores and still seeing Mielle products on the shelf, and not only saying that this is something that my great-great-grandmother created, but not only did she create this amazing products, but she created an amazing community service initiative with Mielle Cares that still pours back into the community. So it's not only about, having the products longevity on the shelves and still continuing to serve customers, but serving customers on a community service basis. Like that's been our foundation first and foremost. So how do we continue lifting the community up as we climb? And again, we want to expand our reach into HBCUs and giving back to HBCUs, helping them with support and infrastructure as, they continue to grow, and the influx of students that are applying will have, housing and, different educational programs. So legacy to me is like continuing to lift up the next generation, to show the possibilities and to show that they can do what I've done. We like to say we're breaking glass ceilings. I want the next generation to come behind me and to shatter those glass ceilings next.
How are you thinking about innovation at Mielle, and what's the next evolution of the hair care industry?
Yeah, so when I think about innovation, I really think about having the foresight to understand the consumer needs and the consumer pain points, and knowing that with this ever-changing technology world that we're living in, things change, and they change instantly and rapidly. And it's being able to have our pulse on the consumer and having that ability to continue to have social listening skills to know what the consumer wants, because she's very vocal and she'll tell you what she needs. And we've been able to innovate and have the foresight to not only listen to her, but to also anticipate the needs of what our consumer needs before she even knows what she needs. So we're going to continue to keep our finger and our pulse on the community and continue to expand into new categories. So not just focus on hair care, but how do we tap into body care? How do we tap into skincare? But we're expanding by also listening to what are the consumer pain points, because as an entrepreneur, my foundation has always been problem solving. What is the problem that the consumer has, and how do we innovate faster and better than anyone with high quality products, high performing products that meets the consumer needs?
You recently announced that you're planning to launch your own investment firm. When are you expecting to get that off the ground? What is the target size of that fund?
Yeah, so we're just, we're in the works right now. So we haven't announced the target size yet. So we're still working on it. And, the whole goal for that is to, as we think about the 10-year anniversary and what we went through, the challenges, the obstacles, like we want to be able to be that resource and that investor that we didn't have when we first started. So we really just want to focus on like, how do we find these budding entrepreneurs that have these great ideas but don't have the access to capital? And that's what we really want to pour into.
Just a couple of questions just about leadership I'd love to quickly run through rapid fire. What is your leadership style?
My leadership style is authoritative, firm, but also empathetic.
What keeps you up at night, business-wise?
What keeps me up at night is figuring out new innovation ideas.
Fair enough. How has the company culture changed pre-acquisition to post-acquisition? And alongside that, how has your management style changed pre to post-acquisition?
My management style has now been more of like coaching and just helping, our employees understand like the reason why, we decided to partner, and that's to scale and also create more opportunities for them as well too. So now it's changed from, well, it's still like authoritative and firm, but now I'm more so like a coach and coaching them along the process.
Gentle parenting.
Yes.
And in terms of culture?
Yeah, our culture has always been like a family environment, and that's very important to us. And one of the key things that even when we sat down at the table and negotiated with P&G is to do no harm and keep the magic. And a part of our magic is to maintain our culture and that family camaraderie and a family environment. We want everyone on the Mielle team to buy into the vision, to know what the vision is, to support the vision, because when they are in the vision and they know what the ultimate goal is, you can get more productivity from them. And so our whole goal is to make sure that people understand, they know what our vision is, and they know how this is impactful to the community, and to show that you're a part of this journey and how you're impacting the people that are looking at us and that's inspired by us. They're inspired by you because you're a part of this story.
When you're hiring specifically leaders at Mielle, what skills, what traits are you looking for? And are there any red flags in terms of those said skills and traits?
Yeah, so when we look to hire for Mielle, I think that certain skills can be taught. I like to look for character. I want to understand that you have good character, because that's something you can't teach. You have integrity, because that's also something you can't teach. So that's first and foremost to me, like, do you have character? Do you have integrity? And do you also know how to lead and coach and manage your team? Because you're only as good as the people that, are not only just like following you and influenced by you, but you're good as the team that, you can get stuff done through them, right? And I think that's a great characteristic trait of a leader, is like, how can I get stuff done through other people? And how do I create more people to follow me as a leader and not resent me as a leader? So I think a part of that leadership style is really just being like empathetic and being about team. There is no I in team. Melvin and I, my husband, we have not done this together. We have done this collaboratively as a team. And so that's very important that any leader that we bring in, they always lead with a collaborative approach, because I've always felt that the vision doesn't just come from two eyes, it comes from a collective.
You mentioned at the top of the conversation that you're a labor and delivery nurse. Are there any skills or traits or character development you bring from that into this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that a lot of the skill sets that I've learned as a nurse have definitely paid off in my entrepreneurial journey. Number one is being organized. That's very important as a nurse. I would say number two is developing that trust that I was able to build with my community, because as a nurse, I worked with all different walks of life. I've worked at a lot of high-risk hospitals, so I know how to work under pressure. Being able to go into a patient's room, and before I stuck you with a large IV needle, or if I gave you a medication, a white pill that you didn't know what it was, you have to trust that I'm going to give you the right medication, and you have to trust that I'm going to take care of you and stick you with, kindness, even though it may hurt, but you have to trust that I know what I'm doing. And, I took that same skill set and said, how can I get women to trust that what I'm saying, and really get them to believe in that the education that I'm providing is really legit education, because I'm, Joe Schmo that just came out of nowhere and no one knew who I was. So, and especially like Black women with our hair, we want to trust the person that we're talking to and we're dealing with. We want to trust them that what we put on our hair is not going to fall out. And that same level of trust and empathy that I applied with when I went into my patient's room is the same level of care that I went into, building a relationship with my customers. And then also having that science background, that knowledge of going into, labs and looking at the chemists and how we work together to formulate, I had to have a level of understanding of the chemistry component. And the reason why I was able to understand that was because of my science background in nursing.
We'll end with this question. Obviously, you have a range of hair care products. This may be a bit like asking you to select your favorite child, but if you had to choose one product from your product line, what would it be? Your go-to, your favorite, just one.
So I would say, okay, so we just came out with this new amazing rosemary mint scalp scrub.
Oh, it's been all over TikTok.
Yeah. So I'm going to say that, yes, even though it's like asking me who's my favorite child, but I would say, I'm going to say that one because I love wash days and I love cleansing my scalp, and I just love how it feels on my scalp, and it also lathers into a shampoo when you rinse it. So you get an exfoliating, cleansing feeling when you use it on your scalp, and then you don't have to apply shampoo, it just turns into one.
Multi-purpose product,
yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Monique, for joining us. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you for having me.